Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. It's Thursday, the 14th of March in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, Ukraine strikes Russian oil refineries, the EU backs more weapons for Kyiv, and Putin says he's ready for nuclear war.
UK ministers say that they will stop foreign states from controlling or influencing British newspapers.
Plus, playing top trumps, the presumptive Republican presidential nominee floats hedge fund titan John Paulson as a potential Treasury secretary.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
Ukrainian drones have attacked 3 oil refineries deep within Russian territory. The 3 facilities account for about 12% of Russia's oil processing capacity and have been halted. President Putin says the strikes are aimed at disrupting his presidential election later this week. Speaking during a meeting with the US Secretary of State, the European Union's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, made it clear that Ukraine needs more support.
Ukraine is our biggest and immediate worry for us Europeans and for you too, for our common security. And the Russian aggressor will not stop. We have to stop it. You are doing a lot. We are doing a lot. Both, I think we can do still more in order to support Ukrainians in this very challenging time.
Josep Borrell has come as EU ambassadors agreed in principle to provide €5 billion in military support for Ukraine. A much larger $60 billion US aid package remains in political limbo.
Now, Dutch election winner Geert Wilders has dropped his bid to become Prime Minister after months of coalition talks. His decision adds to the questions over the political direction of Europe's 5th largest economy. This is nearly 4 months after his election victory. The far-right lawmaker pulled off a surprise victory in the Dutch election last November, with his anti-European Union party securing around 25% of parliamentary seats.
The UK government says it will ban foreign states from controlling or influencing UK newspapers and news magazines. The proposal from ministers appears to rule out a UAE-linked takeover of the Telegraph. The move comes amid growing disquiet in Parliament about the takeover of the nearly 170-year-old newspaper.
After reaching the threshold to secure the Republican nomination in the US presidential race, Donald Trump is now turning his attention to selecting potential cabinet members. On his list is financier John Paulson. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has the details.
These are described as informal talks. A familiar name has come up in the financial sector, hedge fund titan John Paulson as Treasury Secretary. Now, Trump has talked about Paulson saying, this is a quote, John Paulson, the great John Paulson, made plenty of money in Nevada, doesn't live there, makes a hell of a lot of money. He makes money everywhere he goes, actually, so money machine. Maybe we'll put, him at Treasury. You want to make a little money? Nothing, of course, is set in stone, and Mr. Trump has been known to change his mind. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says market interest rates are unlikely to return to pre-pandemic levels. 10-year US Treasury yields averaged 2.39% in the 2010s, which was low by historical standards. Analysts are split on if they will return to that level after inflation comes down or if the economy has fundamentally changed post-COVID. The debate has major implications for US government spending, with past low rates enabling borrowing sprees.
The fate of an app used by 170 million Americans now lies in the hands of 100 senators. That's after the US House voted to ban TikTok unless its Chinese owner ByteDance divests. The proposal now faces numerous concerns and potential revisions that could slow or kill it in the US Senate. TikTok's CEO says that the company will fight the decision.
Over the last few years, we have invested to keep your data safe and our platform free from outside manipulation. We have committed that we will continue to do so. We will continue to do all we can, including exercising our legal rights, to protect this amazing platform that we have built with you.
Shu Cho, CEO of TikTok, speaking via the app there. So far, the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has committed only to reviewing the TikTok legislation when it comes to the House.
The UK's housing market picked up in February with an increase in buyer inquiries and properties for sale. This is according to the latest data from the Royal Institution for Chartered Surveyors, saying the market's at a 3-year high for properties on sale. That's as the number of buyer inquiries rose for a second consecutive month. The findings confirm the report from the Nationwide Building Society in Halifax, showing that house prices are now little changed from their peak in 2022.
And those are our top stories for you this morning. On the markets, the MSCI Asia Pacific Index is currently flat. Euro Stoxx at 50 futures this morning, tilting slightly negative. 10-year Treasury yields at 4.2%, up a basis point. Those are the markets. In
a moment, we'll get more on the latest developments in the Russia-Ukraine war and bring you details of the UK government's efforts to limit foreign control of news organisations. Another story that caught our eye this morning about a company that's moving out of Canary Wharf. Another one.
Yeah, this is Moodys.
Now, this is something that we'd reported back in July, that they were looking for somewhere new to move to when their lease ends at the One Canada Square building, so the pyramid top skyscraper at the centre of the Canary Wharf estate. They've now found somewhere on Gresham Street, just behind St Paul's here in the city, and they're planning to move in 2026. It's a smaller office. They're looking for somewhere about a third smaller than their current imprint.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, the 1990s heyday of Canary Wharf, is that coming to an end, or is it simply changing? Because HSBC going from Canary Wharf also, but is actually that whole area in East London just going to be a new type of retail, housing area, even with diagnostics and sort of healthcare type facilities there, life sciences also? Does actually that whole part of East London have to change?
Yeah, exactly, and it's an interesting trend to watch, and something that we've seen the owners of the estate already try to pivot some of the buildings there into new uses, but Moodys, the latest, to be set to be moving out of there in 2026.
Now, let's turn our attention to our top story and get the latest on the war in Ukraine and those drone strikes on 3 Russian oil refineries. Bloomberg's Tony Halpin joins us now for more. Good morning, Tony. What is the significance then of these strikes, and how much will they affect Russia's war machine? They have had an impact.
Yes, good morning. It's part of a campaign that Ukraine's been waging that targets infrastructure and industrial facilities with 2 clear goals, really. One is to damage Russia's ability to earn money to pay for its war, and also its ability to produce material and oil and fuel supplies to support the army on the front lines. Just those 3 strikes that you mentioned alone, the refineries have a capacity of something like 12% of Russia's total capacity. We don't really know how much of that was damaged yesterday, but clearly from a morale point of view, it's a boost for Ukraine and damaging for Russia.
Tony, this is, as we've heard from Vladimir Putin, threatening to use nuclear weapons in case of a threat to Russia's sovereignty or independence. How seriously should we take those threats?
I think probably not as much as Putin would like us to take them seriously. It's part of his saber rattling, which he does occasionally to threaten the West and create space for him and his military to continue their war in Ukraine. It's a standard Russian position that nuclear weapons would be used if there was a threat to Russia's existence and sovereignty. There's clearly no such threat because Putin sits in the Kremlin. But more importantly, Putin did say yesterday that he'd never thought of using tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine, which was a much bigger threat and had the West and NATO in particular very concerned.
We've also had EU ambassadors agreeing to another €5 billion in military support for Ukraine. How far will that go to meeting the need that Kyiv's talked about so frequently?
Yes, I mean, they're having real trouble supplying their military on the front lines with sufficient munitions because of delays in aid from Europe and the US. So this money is going towards Kiev's urgent needs in things like artillery, munitions, drones and air defense, and it will certainly be a help. But what Ukraine is really waiting on is more than $60 billion of US military aid, which has been stuck in Congress for months, and there's no sign that that's going to be released anytime soon.
Tony, it feels like we've been talking so much in recent times about the military needs of Ukraine in this conflict. Meanwhile, is there any hope of the conflict moving towards an end? Is there any sign of progress in that direction?
Very frankly, not much. Putin gave an interview to state television yesterday ahead of his election campaign this weekend, where he basically said that Russia was open to discussions, but ones that took account of realities on the ground. And that's just simply Russian code for saying we want to keep what we've invaded and have managed to hold on to. That's a position that's unacceptable to Ukraine and to Ukraine's allies. And there's no sign really of any talks that will be leading to some kind of negotiations and a deal to end the fighting.
OK, Tony Halpin, thank you so much for being with us this morning, then taking us through the latest on Ukraine and the war with Russia. Bloomberg's Tony Halpin.
Well, back here in the UK, the government is planning to ban foreign states from owning or controlling British newspapers and news magazines. The Culture Minister, Stephen Parkinson, confirmed reports the government would tighten competition legislation currently passing through Parliament. And this would appear to rule out the takeover of the Daily Telegraph newspaper and Spectator magazine by the UAE-backed Redbird IMI. Joining us now to discuss is our UK politics reporter, James Woolcock. James, what are the proposed changes then to the Digital Markets Act that would be relevant to this area?
So they're not actually on paper yet, Stephen, which we'll get to a few irregularities that we'll see. But what they announced in the House of Lords, this was a Culture Secretary, Lord Parker, was that any influence or controlling stake by a foreign state, crucially state not company, i.e. sort of Rupert Murdoch's News Corp would be fine, would be blocked by the government. And that would just be a thing that would happen, i.e. in future, if a foreign state were to make a bid for a UK newspaper, there would be an investigation by CMA or Ofgem, or Ofcom, into that outlet, and if it was a foreign state, and if it were, the minister would be compelled to unwind it. It would just simply be blocked. The bit that we don't know is how much is a foreign state. It's a controlling interest. Is it 25%? Is it 50%? Certainly, though, it would spell doom for the current planned acquisition of Redbird of the Telegraph Media Group. Yeah.
There is also an interesting angle to this, that it is newspapers and news magazines, but it is not online. It's not any digital assets, for example. I mean, what does it mean for the Telegraph? What does it mean for the media landscape?
I mean, the way I take that, Caroline, is when we look at kind of the balance of the UK's national security legislation, how it looks at foreign takeover companies, that this move has been extremely ad hoc in nature. And this is a targeted move that is almost effectively designed like a guided missile to take on the Telegraph and no other company at all. No other broadcaster. It doesn't affect them. It is specifically for the Telegraph as a law. And in that sense, it speaks not to the UK's big strategic thinking on foreign ownership, but the chaos in the Conservative Party and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's inability to kind of set the political weather. In this debate, he has been led by his MPs and what they want. And so that is why it's almost difficult to comment on what it says about the UK's foreign ownership rules. It's more about what it says about the Conservative Party.
Is the UK then trying to strike a balance here and in given that the UAE doesn't have a free press and isn't a place where, you know, that the media is supported in that way, is this a question of getting a balance right?
But, I mean, just to sort of generally push back on this even, this is almost not a debate for the UK government. It's a debate for UK Conservative MPs. And what happened here is this amendment was announced in the Lords after the former Tory Lord, as in sort of the head of the Lords, Baroness Stowell, brought an amendment to bring this about. The Conservative backbenchers and Lords forced this issue onto the agenda by bringing this amendment, and then there were enough MPs in the Commons that would back this. They reckoned about 100 Conservative MPs that the UK government felt it would lose any vote on this amendment. So sort of, I know we're very deep in the Westminster weeds here, but what has happened is Rishi Sunak's government have had to bring in this law to fend off a move from behind from their own MPs to dump this and stop the Telegraph happening. So it's strange to comment on what this says about the future of UK foreign ownership, when really we should be looking at what this says about the state of the Conservative Party.
And that in and of itself is part of the criticism and the concern, that it probably is not great policy and great law, you know, to make a piece of legislation in reaction quite knee-jerk reaction to one event or one thing that is happening. What does it mean then overall for what happens to the Telegraph and the Spectator if it is so specifically about this one particular deal?
Well, so there are a few options on the table, right? There's the one that Bloomberg reported on earlier this week that maybe, depending on what this legislation says, a lower stake would be amenable. And then if there were some kind of talks or tie-up between some of the other bidders, looking at Daily Mail, General Trust, or looking at maybe sort of News Corp, possibly even the Paul Marshall Group, although that wasn't part of the talks that we've reported, that might be amenable to the ministers. Lucy Fraser, the culture secretary, is set to rule on this deal anyway, because she has the power to block it or defer it regardless already, just whether she chooses to exercise said power. Or maybe Redbird and their UAE-linked bid will just get a bit, frankly, upset with the amount of sort of red tape they've been tied up in and the sort of disdain that they've been shown for any willingness to bid to this, and abandon the bid entirely. All this means, though, if you're working at the Telegraph or trying to run a business strategy for the Telegraph in the meantime, you're left in limbo, uncertain about the group's future and ownership structure.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.